called Next 25, and it was looking at our future building system and what's wrong with it, and why aren't we making better long-term decisions. So I go through the circus of getting the kids off to childcare and school and making all those compromises and juggles that you have to make as a mum. It needed to be worth it.
On the role of motherhood and the transition or having multiple hats of being a mother, being a specialist, a strategist, a consultant and a politician.
And thinking there's only one way to approach this, and then realising that the 5 people I was working with who came from completely different backgrounds, professional and cultural, all had a different approach to solving the problem.
View from a culture point of view, and then how there's a culture conducive to first-time independent women coming into the politics.
So the first time I went into question time, it was completely shocking, because in no other environment, in any workplace in Australia, would this sort of behaviour be acceptable. Like Liberal, Labor, Greens, me, and they were unanimous. The government then still hasn't responded more than 18 months after those recommendations have been handed down.
When we saw in the last election a lot of independents coming into play, and majority of them were women. So what do you see that trend links to the role of women in politics?
And I think that's really exciting to see more women coming into Parliament, bringing those sorts of values, broad life experience and a long-term perspective, and making a fantastic contribution to the way we make our laws.
Welcome, Kate. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Deb. Good to be here.
Thank you for your time. There's so many things I can talk to you, and a wide variety of topics, and with your experience and any background. Could I ask you to broadly give a deep understanding of your background and your key instinct and key purpose in your life?
So I have quite a diverse career background, but I always have been driven by trying to make the world a better place, but in a range of different ways. And I was a corporate lawyer to start with, but always did a lot of pro bono work as well, and then went and did an MBA, worked at Boston Consulting Group as a strategy consultant, and had a mix of corporate work but also non-profit and for-purpose work in there. I worked at Wesfarmers for 7 years in Aboriginal affairs, in sustainability, and as General Manager of Emerging Ventures, which was a more commercial role, looking at the opportunities that would open up in the next 20 years and how we could be part of that. And then I worked in community services at Anglicare WA as Director of Innovation and Strategy. And a lot of that was about rethinking how we provide services to the community in a way that actually is centred on the person rather than people having to fit into the system. And I sat on a number of non-profit boards, and all through that I was very aware of the way our system works, and one of the non-profit boards I sat on was called the Australian Futures Project, which is now called Next 25, and it was looking at our future building system and what's wrong with it, and why aren't we making better long-term decisions. So I thought a lot in the 10 years I was on that board about the role of politics and politicians in building our future, which really led to me saying yes when I was asked to run.
Before I go on the independence and your intention to run for politics, could you take me through how has your purpose of serving evolved across growing up, and can you give me some instances or stories of your younger self which had those moments of reflection?
I think I've always assumed that service to community is just part of life, and I came from a family where that was deeply ingrained in whether it's in politics or teaching or law, and it was an underlying assumption of life for me, so it wasn't something I was particularly conscious of. And then a number of times I was at a career crossroads and was tossing up between what's good for the CV and what really speaks to my need for purpose. And I made different decisions over the years, but I think as I got older, I became more confident about making the decisions that really spoke to me, that gave me a sense of purpose and role in the world. Also, I think as a mother, when you look at the trade-offs that you need to make in order to have a career and also have a family that you feel you're supporting, it felt to me like it was really important that I was getting out of bed in the morning for something that mattered. So if I was going to, go through the circus of getting the kids off to childcare and school and making all those compromises and juggles that you have to make as a mum, it needed to be worth it.
Yes.
So increasingly through my career, that purpose has been more important in the roles that I've chosen.
Very powerful. I think could you, and that's my next leading question is on the role of motherhood and the transition or having multiple hats of being a mother, being a specialist, a strategist, a consultant, and a politician. How does these multiple hats sit on the same woman?
I think there is a huge asset in mothers who want to work because they become very efficient. And I struggled with those multiple identities and always feeling like you're making a compromise, either as a mum or in your job. But I think you do bring a richer perspective to both your work and also a different energy to your role as a mother if you have a satisfying career as well as being present with your kids, which is also obviously a satisfying career. But I think that sense of balance and purpose is very enriching both on an individual level but also at a societal level, that mothers are a huge asset for our community.
How do you see the role of diversity from a point of view of not just gender, age, intellect, background, experiences, and deliver value to politics, or should be a stronger input to where the public policy is done and thought of and delivered?
Every sector and job I've worked in, I've seen the benefit of diversity. I've worked in male-dominated areas and female-dominated areas and seen that a balance is the best. I remember when I was studying my MBA, getting a group assignment and thinking, well, there's only one way to approach this, and then realising that the 5 people I was working with who came from completely different backgrounds, professional and cultural, all had a different approach to solving the problem. And I really saw then the benefit of tapping into that diversity, thrashing it out, working out what is the best way forward, and being open and humble about your own way of doing things, and excited and curious about what other ways might be too.
And getting into politics in that instance of making a decision from different perspectives, but what was the critical key juncture in your decision making, and what lens did you use to make that final call?
So I was approached in early 2022 by a community group that wanted to run an independent candidate in Curtin. And I spoke to them about it, and I shared a lot of the same frustrations with our existing system. I don't think I would have been confident in myself to put myself out there and have a go if it wasn't for this broad community group that said, we think change is possible. And that was really exciting and really hopeful. The thought of running and being in politics did make me feel sick, because it's such a huge change to your life, and there's so much public scrutiny. But ultimately, I think I was at a stage of my life where I thought, if I want to see change happening, I've got to do everything I can to contribute to that, and I can't sit around waiting for someone else to do it. And I thought different is possible, and that was really exciting to me, the thought that rather than working within the rules of a game that seemed broken, we could change the game and do that in a way that inspired optimism and hope. And I think that was sorely lacking in our political system. So it was a very exciting opportunity. And ultimately I thought, you regret the things you don't do more than the things that you do. And after saying to the group, if you find someone else, I'll be really supportive, but they said, no, we think it's you. I thought, I've got to do this for my kids, and because this might be my big opportunity to be able to contribute to a more optimistic future.
What do you see the biggest public policy challenges from a federal point of view are broken and needs to be fixed now, and so that things can be taken care of?
I think the thread running through all our public policy challenges is long-termism, and we see the two-party system creating these short-term decisions based on what will win votes at the next election. And I see that running through things like climate change, which I think is the biggest public policy challenge of our generation, but also housing. We've had 20 years of policy from both sides of Parliament that increases house prices, and that's created a huge gap between the haves and the have-nots. And we need to take a long-term perspective to get that back in balance, so that if you're in your 20s, it's a reasonable aspiration to think that you could own a house one day, which at the moment it's really not. We also see it on tax reform. Both sides are happy to talk about tax cuts, but no one's willing to talk about where the money will come from to pay for the things that we believe we deserve, like health and aged care, NDIS and a safety net that can help people when they're in trouble. So, and I think we see a gridlock because with the media and the political system, no one's incentivised to actually lead for the long term. It's all thinking about where the votes come from in the next election. And I think that's a fundamental problem that we can actually change with some different long-term thinking in there from people who are not entirely focused on getting into government at the next election.
And also from the theatre of the question time and the politics of what happens at the Parliament. Can you describe a bit more what's your view from a culture point of view, and then how is the culture conducive to first-time independent women coming into the politics, and how is that inducive and conducive?
So the first time I went into question time, it was completely shocking, because in no other environment, in any workplace in Australia, would this sort of behaviour be acceptable. And I think our question time culture is a hangover of a more male-dominated era. And it is seen as part of the tradition, but it doesn't have to be that way. It absolutely should be an opportunity to hold the government of the day to account with robust questioning, but that can be done in a respectful way. And so I've actually worked since I first came in on how we can improve question time. I've given evidence at a procedure committee inquiry. I've written a letter that's been signed by the crossbench in both houses to various people, Manager of Government and Opposition Business, the Speaker of the House, on how we improve question time so that that is actually the best of what people see and how we work. I think that we are changing the culture of question time. Cultural change is slow, but people on both sides have said it's been better since you women have been there on the crossbench. The Speaker calls us Prefect's Corner, because we respect the rules, we are civil, we use question time for what it's supposed to be used for. And I think that even just the presence of more women on the crossbench means both sides are looking a little bit more closely at their behaviour and what's been normalised in our House of Parliament, where we should actually be setting an example for the country.
What do you see from a lens of women in politics would bring differently to an intellectual conversation, to a conversation where you see which could drive conversations for the next 10, 20, 50 years of the country's progression, and for the next generation to see you as leaders?
The group of women who I came into Parliament with have all the academic smarts and intellectual backup that I think is needed. We're all mothers, and I do think that as a mother, you bring a sense of that long term into what you do. I thought a lot before deciding to run about what I would tell my children about my role in mitigating climate change when it was easier than it will be for them. And I really thought about being a good ancestor, and that's part of being a mum, thinking about what it is that you're leaving for your children. So I think that sense of the long term is something that women definitely bring. Another thing is collaboration. And when I look at community groups that I've been involved in, whether it's the primary school P&C or quiz night or in any other environment, a lot of the time the women are the community organisers. And I think that sense of working collaboratively together for an outcome rather than it being a toe-to-toe fight is the sort of attitude we need more of to develop laws that satisfy a larger proportion of the population and think in a longer time frame.
Could you also describe a bit more on your broader political values? I don't want to limit you on just to a spectrum of left and right, but the way you want to define yourself in terms of where are your political values and then social values stand.
So I never felt like I belonged in any of the political parties. I agreed with something of what they all said, but not all of it. And it's interesting looking at my voting record since I've been in Parliament, agonising over every single vote. I've supported between 49 and 52% of each of the Liberal, Labor and the Greens, of the ideas that they've put forward in Parliament. And so that makes sense to me then why I didn't feel like I fit in any of those parties, because I half agree with all of them. So I would describe it as, I come with an MBA, having a strong, robust economy, good productivity is really important to me. And I think our industrial relations system needs some reform, has tipped too far towards or against productivity. I have a strong social conscience. I think that in Australia we should be able to meet the basic needs of every citizen, and that means housing and food and adequate basic supports. I think the environment is really important, and the impact of climate is massive for Australia, not just physically but also on our economy. We are currently exporting things that the world is trying to get off. So we need to think about where our next wave of economic prosperity comes from. Now, those things don't fit neatly on a left-right spectrum. But what I see in my community is that there are a lot of people who think we can have a strong economy but also provide an appropriate safety net. We can protect our environment and do our bit globally towards climate change without giving up our future prosperity. These are not either-ors. The world no longer fits on a left-right spectrum, and that's why there is so much confusion around the political polls. And I think that's why we see both of the major parties not really quite sure what it is that they stand for.
The idea of short-termism, which you talked about, and not looking policy from a longer-term point of view, 3-year term cycle, which are short to bring meaningful change. From a point of view of a voter who's thinking about and leading up to elections, and there's only a 6-week period when the theatre of politics come into play, both the sides have, all the sides have their own role to play in the dance of politics. What do you see the role of the first-time voter or new voters this election, upcoming election? What things they should be worried and thinking about?
Probably my main point on that is, as a first-time voter, take your vote really seriously. This is a privilege that people die for in other countries, and we take it for granted. So make sure that you make an informed decision and you understand who the candidates are and how you're casting your vote. I think misinformation and disinformation is an increasing concern in our democracy. And so the challenge for first voters, and really all voters, is to question what you hear, look beyond it, always be curious about what the other side is, and don't just take everything on face value. For my view, and people will have different views, cost of living is a huge concern at the moment, and that becomes front of mind for everyone. There are underlying things that will affect that cost of living question for generations to come. So thinking about housing is a really good one. Like, how are we actually going to break the gridlock and get some policy that increases housing supply? Climate, I think, should still be on the agenda for, if you're a first-time voter now, then the world will be many degrees warmer by the time you finish your voting life. and that will have an increasing impact on our prosperity, but also our quality of life. So these are some of the issues. Another one that I think is significant is the integrity of government. And one of the things that worried me is we were seeing this spiral where people don't trust politicians, they think they're all corrupt, therefore no one wants to go into politics because there's no respect with it. And so that means the people that go into politics are, then don't actually earn that respect. And we have this terrible spiral that leads us to a dangerous place. So I think respecting our democracy, thinking optimistically, believing that change is possible and democracy can work is so important for people going into their first election. And democracy only works when people care and when people turn up. And so turning up, figuratively or physically, but really thinking about it and realising that you're part of this system that is precious and fragile, and we need to protect it because the alternatives are worse.
Do you think the mainstream media reduces the emphasis of or confuses the old idea of the Colosseum, and confuses the mainstream audience or the citizens of the country towards something which is and they not talk too much of what's happening from a public politics point of view in a more serious discussion in a manner which should be considered, should be relevant, and should be more detailed, which leads to lesser understanding of average citizens and which would reflect on the day of elections.
When I was on the board of Next 25, we spoke to 600 leaders and said, why aren't we making better long-term decisions? And everyone said, there's a problem in the system, but I can't do anything about it. The media plays a really important role, but then the media and the 24-hour news cycle is also driven by social media, and which is driven by people's attention spans getting shorter, and it's this cycle. So I definitely think that the media has a really important role to play. And the big challenge in my role is to take complex ideas and turn them into simple, clear messages. I worry about the lack of nuance in our political debate, and so often the answer isn't black and white, and there is a better option if we can think more creatively about what's on offer. So the media has a role to play in that, but citizens also have a role to play in looking deeper, investigating, trying to find out more about the things that they care about, and being curious about people with different views to theirs. As we see polarisation and people ending up in opposing camps, we're losing that ability to listen to people on the other side, to recognise that they might have some good arguments and there's some validity there, and that we might be able to find solutions that are not yes, no answers.
On your idea of your social conscience, we had multiple royal commissions on different social aspects. For example, providing dignified care for elderly Australians, Royal Commission in Aged Care. Last year we finished Royal Commission in Disability, which was a 4.5-year long Royal Commission. What do you see Royal Commission as a tool, either to delay the decision making by the government, or taking the decision today and spending the money on the problems, all the challenges today, or pushing it out to the next election or the next parliament, who might ever be? And the final idea would be from the Royal Commissions. There's so many recommendations which come out, and these recommendations do not get taken over by. So once we spend taxpayers' money, to give an example, we spent almost $450 million on the Royal Commission for Disability. There were 300 plus recommendations which came out. We have accepted almost 10 to 20 odd recommendations of the whole recommendations. So what do you see Royal Commission as a tool?
I mean, Royal Commissions and Parliamentary Committee inquiries, these are all tools in the process. And in some ways, we absolutely need those tools because we do need to go deeper. We can't expect something to be resolved in a week. So the big opportunity is to take all that work that's been funded by taxpayers and then see what we can do with it, and deeply look at those recommendations and implement the ones that make sense. Now, not every recommendation will make sense or be practical, so there does need to be a process there, but I think governments should be far more accountable in relation to the royal commissions that they have either stood up or any parliamentary committee inquiries. For example, I sit on a committee that did an inquiry that the government asked for on online gambling, and we came up with 31 recommendations that had broad support from across the parliament, Liberal, Labor, Greens, me, and they were unanimous. The government then still hasn't responded more than 18 months after those recommendations have been handed down. Now, the media should be holding government to account, saying, you saw this was a problem, you got an inquiry done, you've got the recommendations, where's the action? And I think that's where both parliamentarians but also the media have a really strong role to make sure that we're making the most out of taxpayer-funded inquiries and investigations.
When we saw in the last election a lot of independents coming into play, and majority of them were women, and then there is another round of independents standing in different federal seats. So what do you see that trend linked to the role of women in politics?
I mean, part of it is probably a correction. I think that there has been a perception that there's an imbalance in Parliament. Part of it also, I think, is because a number of the women who were elected at the last election were part of this community independent movement. Women are great community organisers, and I think that has risen out of community, and those women, women are the PNC presidents, and they're running the sporting teams, and they're doing those things that create connections. So, and you learn a lot of skills in those sorts of roles as well. You learn how to collaborate. You learn how to get good outcomes, even if you can't control anyone when you're working with volunteer organisations. You have to make a good case for it and work reasonably with people rather than using power or control to get those outcomes. And I think they are skill sets that are sorely needed in Parliament, people who will work collaboratively and pragmatically with either side, not need to have the win and own the win, but are driven by the outcome, not the ego. And I think that's really exciting to see more women coming into Parliament, bringing those sorts of values, broad life experience and a long-term perspective, and making a fantastic contribution to the way we make our laws.
This year, the theme of the International Women's Day is March Forward. What does that theme means to you? And then how, if you have to reflect onto it from your past and your future plans, what do you see it as?
To me, marching implies purpose and confidence, and also a bit of a battle. And I see that as being where we are now. That and when I think about my experience, I had the purpose, the community group gave me that confidence, and we were able to march into a battle and really change the game. And I think that's the opportunity for women in Australia, is rather than trying to beat men in a game designed by men, let's think about how we can change that game so that it's inclusive of everyone, and we can bring some qualities that are traditionally associated with the feminine, like compassion, kindness. We can bring these back into the public conversation and make them part of our national political discourse.
Could you talk about the role of women in your own life, from your family, your close friends, and if you can tell how it has impacted your personality, your way of thinking?
I was raised really thinking that I could achieve anything, and to be honest, I've never seen being a woman as holding me back in any way professionally. So I had female and male role models in my life, and probably didn't really distinguish them on gender, because all of those paths seemed possible to me. My mum is a strong woman. She was a stay-at-home mum and raised 4 children, but she really raised me to think that I could do whatever I wanted to do. And what I am inspired by is when I look at my teenage sons, their attitude to women and their assumption of equality, I think that creates that world where gender does become less relevant. My 13-year-old daughter has been wonderfully inspiring to me, and also I think she's been very inspired by what she's seen, and I love thinking about how the world that she sees has changed and what options are available to her, and the opportunities are endless, and I think that's exciting, that normalisation. And that sense that gender is one of your many characteristics that makes you who you are, but it doesn't define you.
For the re-election campaign for your seat of Curtin, what are you seeing the main key issues in your electorate?
I mean, in this election, cost of living is a big factor, and people are really struggling with inflation. Some of that is within the government's control, and a lot of it is due to international factors. It does change how people are thinking about the options, on the table. Housing is a huge aspect of that cost of living, and I think we've seen 20 years of policy on both sides that makes house prices go up. We now need to pull all the levers on housing at a federal, state and local level, and there needs to be some cooperation around that, and there are lots of ideas that I would like to see implemented. Integrity for me remains a big issue, that we need transparency and accountability in government, and in order to retain trust in our democratic system, that's really precious and fragile, so that's an important thing. And then climate continues to come up, and I think we'll see some really hot weather over the summer, and that will remind people. We've seen the LA fires, and that will remind people about the era-defining change that's happening and Australia's role. We are the most susceptible to climate change. We can also have an impact beyond our size, given our role in critical minerals and renewable energy and iron ore processing. With renewables, these are opportunities where we can really punch above our weight and make ourselves essential to the world as we decarbonise. So I think these are all issues that people talk to me about when I'm door knocking, and they all affect each other in different ways. But yeah, they're the main things.
From a point of view of access to politics, how do you, in democracy, a functioning democracy, how do you democratize access to politics? So people came to you and then gave you the opportunity to run for a seat, but how do you make that access to be a politician democratic?
So I think the community independent movement is really exciting because of that democratisation of access to politics. So Curtin Independent, which was the group that asked me to run, started as a small group of people, started with 2 people having a conversation in a cafe saying we must be able to do better than this. They then built a group from across the electorate who then spoke to their contacts, and it grew and it grew, and then they started the search for a candidate. Now that to me goes back to the heart of what democracy is. And rather than having to only operate through party pre-selection processes where there are a whole lot of other incentives at play, if community groups can identify a candidate that they think represents them and put them forward and have a decent crack at winning a seat, I think that says really good things for the health of democracy in Australia.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dev.
Thank you for your time.